Welcome to Insight Marketing Success, the podcast where marketing knowledge meets real-world experience, from vision to execution.
Welcome to IMS. Today we have Gabriel Silverstein. Welcome. Gabriel, tell us about yourself, who you are.
An investment banker by background, commercial real estate specialist in focus for the last 31 years. What has encompassed everything from corporate representation brokerage to investment and sale and financing brokerage to now our primary focus really right now, which is ownership on our own account and building that while we continue to do some financing and brokerage intermediary work for others.
Okay. And do you do it for commercial real estate or for any type of
all commercial? Yeah, as someone I once knew liked to say, nothing with a bed in it. Now, technically, I guess multifamily, it's a little different, but what they think he meant was no residential, no hotels type thing. Those are the things we do admittedly stay away from. But what I would say the core food groups, if you will, of the commercial real estate world. Industrial, office, retail, somewhat, multifamily, somewhat, and some specialties within that, like build to suit, medical office, etc.
So tell us about your education. Where did you graduate from, and how did you arrive to be who you are today?
We only have how long?
Summarize it.
I'll give you the Cliff Notes. Yeah,
yes.
The Cliff Notes version of that. My undergraduate degrees are from the University of Notre Dame. And which in an indirect way actually did direct, very short dotted line connects to what I do today. I went into investment banking, but I also had, through contacts and an organization that I helped run at the University of Notre Dame, which is called the Student International Business Council, still around today. One of our advisors when I was there, was also part of the Notre Dame Law School, was a guy named Igor Gratzin. Igor had been part of the Supreme Soviet. He was from Tallinn, Estonia. Back when for those that don't even remember the USSR, the Soviet Union, it had a somewhat powerless, but nonetheless an existing kind of Congress-like body called the Supreme Soviet, which had members from all of the member states of the Soviet Union, and Igor had been part of that. And he was the one that led the walkout of the Supreme Soviet. That was kind of the start of the crumbling of the Soviet Union. So he, was very much one of the forefront catalyzers of that happening in the late 80s, early 90s. And then he had written the Estonian Constitution. Ended up at the Notre Dame Law School, working with us on some things. I helped him set up a foundation for himself there. And he called me up one morning, and I was still a student actually. He called me up at about 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning, which, if you think about what a Notre Dame student would be doing on a Saturday morning at 7 a.m. I was very definitely not awake and ready for this phone call, but it was an interesting phone call, and he. After the initial, why are you calling me at 7 in the morning, Igor? He said, Gabriel, I have very interesting opportunity, and I think you might be the only person would ever do it. And I thought, I'm not sure if that's a ringing endorsement or not, but okay, lay it on me. And it was to go to Moscow and live in Moscow and help run a joint venture there. This was in the 1993. So it was essentially the first year of, we'll call it legalized capitalism, for-profit private enterprise, as the Soviet Union was going away, and this was, becoming Russia and towards today's modern Russia as we know it. And it had been two older, in their 70s gentlemen that had a hardware store in Alexandria, Virginia, of all places, that in itself a really long, interesting story, ended up in a joint venture with a guy in Moscow with a hardware store, the first, I'll say, Western style hardware store, American-ish style hardware store in Moscow in the era. And these guys in Virginia said Igor had read this article about him. They said, here, we're shipping all this stuff, and it's supposedly all selling, and somehow we never get any profit back. And so my job was to figure out where's all the money going, which I did. But the real impact on my life, besides being just a fascinating experience in all so many ways, was that it introduced me to commercial real estate, or sort of commercial real estate. Not even, it was really more residential, but it introduced me to the opportunities that real estate as an asset class provided, or even still provides, that are very different from a lot of other asset classes. And today, fast forwarding, I have for a number of years referred to commercial real estate, or real estate in general, as the largest relatively unregulated asset class in the world. We're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar asset class. I don't know what the latest numbers are, $20 trillion, something, the value of commercial real estate. And while some of the participants, like insurance companies and banks, are regulated in this industry, there's relatively little regulation when you compare it to investment banking, which I ended up doing before I went back to real estate, in between there, and other industries that have a lot of regulation and a lot of sort of framework built around them, with SEC and FINRA and others. And what I saw these people doing at the time, which is something I've never done directly in real estate, but it was the door that opened. And that was a lot of American and other kind of European expats who were buying Moscow apartments, which had never been, again, all that change that was happening. Suddenly the government gave title to all the people who occupied these things. They never had legal title before. There was not a legally titled ownership system in place during communism, and it's anti-communist, private enterprises. And so all of a sudden, all these Muscovites and others around the Soviet Union owned property, and they didn't, to their detriment in some ways, they didn't have any idea what any of these things were worth. And their mindset was, hey, if you give me $1 today, that's worth more than telling me you'll give me $100 tomorrow for something else. So I'll take the money and run. And so what they were doing was, because they saw how the market worked, they were buying these things at a very low price. They were not finished in a way any of us Westerners would consider luxury or even close. But it was the time in which Deloitte and Touche and Goldman Sachs and everybody in major banking and in financial, et cetera, legal institution in the world had to get people into Moscow, because suddenly this massive country and market had opened up in a way it hadn't been for more than 2 generations. And if you want to convince a New York investment banker to move to Moscow with his family for 4 years in 1993, one of the multiple things you had to give him was a really, really nice place to live for his family. And so what these guys recognized was, you could buy these things for next to nothing, fix them up in a way that we in the West understood to be luxury, but local people had no idea how to do. And they could rent them out, and they were making all of their money back in 3 to 6 months. It was an obscene profit margin by comparison to what you get for opportunity here. And what fascinated me and got me excited about it was the fact that it was that knowledge and that information, and that if you could recognize the knowledge and information value, you had a huge edge up on the market. And you could make these, for people who say they're seeking alpha, et cetera, however you would phrase it, they were making very outsized profits because they understood, this is the market when it's done. This is what I can buy the inputs for and create it for. And that fascinated me. And our industry has changed a tremendous amount over the last 30 years.
All right. So let me stop you there.
But that was the seed that got planted for me, that got me later to real estate.
Let me ask you a couple of things, and I just want succinct answers, okay? Let's start with this. Where did the money go for the investors of hardware in Alexandria? Where was the money going?
The Russian partner was just effectively stealing it.
Okay. So you found it, and you know it.
What we ended up doing, interestingly, we ended up having to recommend to get him to buy out their ownership interest, which he was willing to pay a lot of money for, even though he was never going to give him profits otherwise. So it was kind of funny, but it worked out in the end for them.
Okay,
but
perfect.
It was a strange nuance to it.
So you actually lived in Russia with your family for 4 years, okay? Did you
By
learn
myself.
to?
I lived there myself. It was not for 4 years. I lived there myself for much shorter for a much shorter period of time. But I lived there by myself at the time. I was young and
Okay,
single, and it was fascinating.
okay, fantastic. Did you learn to speak Russian at the time?
I learned pretty well. I didn't go there with a Russian background speaking. I learned the alphabet on the plane. But when people say immersion is the best way to learn a language, I lost about 10 pounds the first 2 weeks I was there because I didn't know how to buy food or where to go. And really quickly, you figure out how to speak the language when you're hungry.
Yeah, I believe that.
So it was
Okay, so
actually, it worked really well.
so you come back from Russia and you start here in the US and you build your own start building your own company, or did you work for a
I
organization?
worked. I worked when I first went over to real estate. I worked for Morgan Stanley. Then I went to a company called LaSalle Partners that had an analyst program, much like the investment banks, only it was just real estate. And LaSalle Partners, for those that don't have enough history in this industry, is the L of JLL. It was LaSalle Partners, then became mixed with Jones Lang Wooten, and that became ultimately later JLL. But so I was working, so that was a very sizable firm at the time, purely asset management, not brokerage. I also then later worked for a company called Equus, which was pure corporate representation. That became what is now Cushman and Wakefield through a series of a bunch of mergers. And then I went on my own, originally in 2004-ish era. And in the 2000 teens, kind of late teens into early 2020s, for about 6 years, I was we maintained our firm, but we were part of SVN, where I was the head of capital markets nationally for SVN. Um, Sadly, my dear friend Kevin, our CEO, died tragically, and after a couple of years of not getting the direction that I had with Kevin or wanted, it was the right time to kind of just go back purely independent.
Okay, so let's talk about when you went purely independent and you create your own company. Tell me about your marketing efforts. How did you push yourself? Did you have relationships that you were able to bring over? How did you get started?
Relationships over. I've historically been far more a relationship based person than I'll say transactional. So to make that make sense for someone, I'm not the guy that gets on the phone and makes 200 cold calls. Never did. I literally one time hit 50. That was my goal, and I never did it again. That's how much I hated cold calling, which is totally opposite everything everybody in this business says you have to do.
Yeah.
Um, so ways that I did it when that wasn't my thing. Firstly, I was very good with a relationship point of view, and I had a very I was by that time I was at a firm when I was at Equus that had a long-term corporate relationship based platform. So that jived very well with me. It resonated well, and I also had and built a team so that, for example, I might not be the good marketing person, cold caller, but we had people who were both senior and junior people. And I was the person that was good once you already got that initial discussion done. Get me on the phone then. Get me on the phone with the CFO, because I was the finance guy when most of the people in this industry didn't have real finance background. Um, that was the
Okay, but when
difference
you
in how I did it.
when you went alone, did you bring all those people in?
We didn't bring all those people. We started kind of from scratch. Built some other people to do that, to do the same thing, but of our own, not coming from that other team. And then over time, just over a long career, built up a lot of contacts and relationships, and have mostly done things, marketing, if you will, through networking since then. In this industry, is, I know and I'm very active in SIOR. I was a board member for a bunch of years. I was chapter president. I was the chair of the 75th anniversary conference in New York, which was the largest we'd ever done. Those are all very heavy networking things, just like Recon in Las Vegas is a lot of in-person networking, and that was the mainstay of my kind of early pre-hire discussion marketing, if you will, relationship building kind of thrust. It was very much an in-person. It was very much, conferences and industry event based, which of course changed in 2020 when everything shut down and people were told they couldn't get together again. That was a dramatic shift, especially for someone doing what I did the way I did it.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about what would you consider was your biggest success, the relationships, especially when you couldn't meet with people. What marketing tactics do you use then?
Well, the one we're using right now, we're recording this on Zoom. Zoom, of course, exploded in 2020, and everybody suddenly had a Zoom shirt, at their desk, and all of these things, which I admit to this day, and this is where I'm a little bit of, I don't want to say a Luddite because I don't think I am, but I don't default to doing everything with video call. Even today, I think voice call is perfectly sufficient for most of what we do. And I don't need to make someone sit there and pretend that they need to look at me for half an hour to talk about something that has nothing to do with me, or vice versa. So I don't do as much video call today as probably most people do. I personally find that also a little bit helps us stick to very much the concisely to where we're trying to go, as opposed to more personality stuff. And that's just a personal choice. Obviously, everybody has different comfort levels with that. So,
yeah. But let's talk about the character. Let's imagine that you go to a restaurant and that you're sitting down in one of those booths and you cannot see the people in front or behind, but you realize the people behind you are talking about yourself and they are two of your best friends. What do you hope they say about you that is positive,
I think people, the things that I hear people take that I think are the things I generally would want, but I'm very kind of straight to the point. At times that's not always for some people that's too much to the point, too many years in New York, I guess, maybe. I'm very straightforward though. I'm very creative. And I think one of the things I have consistently done and been recognized for in the industry is finding ways to do deals that are not things other people have ever done. And it's not to say that every deal needs to have some totally bespoke, new created kind of structure, but even if a deal doesn't on a big basis, a large scale need that, even small things, nuances, little things in a deal, I think I've had a very creative and different approach to a lot of that than a lot of others. One of the first big deals I ever did was a deal in Chicago. It was for a large publishing company at the time, our Donnelly. It was over 100,000 square foot project. We were going into a brand new office building, and we couldn't make the deal work financially because it was too expensive compared to the much lower class old building they were in. And I made the deal happen because I was looking at the architectural plans, and they had 15,000 square feet of subterranean space that they weren't going to use for anything. It was literally just empty because it didn't have windows. And one of these components from this publisher was that they have a large library. And so they required that there be some kind of natural light in it. They wouldn't put it in a windowless room. But I went to the architect and I said, if you change the landscaping and the elevation so that you pull that down and put clear story windows. I didn't even know what they were called, by the way, at the time. I was young enough in the business. And I was literally in a conference room that had clear story windows. And I was like, whatever those are, what if you did that down so that the downstairs could get it? And then we could take all that space that you're not getting any rent for anyway. And in the matter of 30 minutes, we made the deal. Because all of a sudden, 15,000 square feet ended up in space that we paid zero rent, just building expenses. And all of a sudden, the entire equation changed, and the tenant could go into the building they wanted and get the brand new building that was all modern and great. And the architect, to her credit, was not insulted that some young finance jockey decided to play architect, and they modified the building and it made everything work.
Wonderful.
And that's just the kind of thing that, you don't have to do that in every day.
All right. So you are old enough to know that, sometimes things don't go according to plan, and in either personal life or business life. What do you do when things don't go according to plan? How do you ground yourself?
How do I ground myself? Well, there's sort of the personal side of that answer and the professional side of that answer. So, because I think they both play in, as it relates to the personal side, I've over many years gone from being way more uptight than I should have been, and too much of a bull in a china shop, to what I hope is a far more middle of the road kind of, I'll say, persona, and being less reactionary in that way. I give a lot of credit, frankly, to my husband for that. He's very zen. He's, for lack of a better word, and but a lot of that too is personal development, just in having the right kind of confidence in what you do, and also understand and learning to accept and recognize where you can affect change and where you can't. Because fighting the battles that can't be won, that's anti Sun Tzu, for those that like that art of war, right? It's the exact opposite of what Sun Tzu would tell you to do. If battle can't be won, then why would you fight it? So don't. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that I and many of us make in life, is fighting battles we couldn't win anyway. So when you stop fighting the battles you can't win, you tend to do a lot better, I think. And it took time to learn that. I had some people that I saw as mentors that frankly did it, what I today would say they did it wrong. And part of my learning was mimicking that and realizing that it was the wrong way to do it instead of the right way to do it.
Unlearn bad habits, right?
Unlearn the bad habit. And then, from a professional point of view, listen, sometimes, especially when you're an intermediary or you service clients as opposed to you are the client, the reality is stuff happens sometimes that isn't always your fault, or sometimes it is. And learning to face up to that quickly and early with a client, and correcting course quickly, I think, is an important trait. That's really, really important to me. Correct course quickly and admit what happened and deal with it, because the longer that waits, it doesn't fix itself. It gets worse.
I'm with you. Okay. So let's assume that you could go and whisper to yourself when you graduated from Notre Dame a piece of advice. What would you tell yourself, your younger self?
Oh, man. Should have. That's a great question. Relax. One word, relax. Young me, I would have said, just relax. I didn't learn this lesson until a little later, and I didn't really ingrain it until much later in life, sadly. But the best way I relate to that word and to how it applies from a business point of view, one of the things that I've done in life is I very competitively raced Grand Prix sailboats. And I learned doing long distance races. We're talking about many hundreds of miles, in a sailboat that might go 7, 8, 9 knots at a time. So you're talking about days at a time of a race. The wind shifts, the wind moves, the wave move. And early on, someone introduced me to in sailing. Someone introduced me to what I call the 5-minute rule. Oh, the wind shifted. We should go over there. Those guys, 2 miles that way, they're going faster than us. And the lesson was, let's wait 5 minutes. Let's look around. Let's take a deep breath before we suddenly go chase whatever is working now for one person or 2 or 10 or whatever. Let's make sure that's really what we want to do. And a lot of times it isn't. And the 5-minute rule, that's just what I refer to it as. The 5-minute rule is a lesson that I wish I'd have learned a long, long time earlier in my career. Step back, take a deep breath, think about it for a second, then react.
Wonderful. All right, Gabriel, what do you want your legacy to be?
I would like my legacy to be that the people that I worked with were very successful because we worked together, and that they learned something and saw me as one of the people in the industry who won't give in to the many greedy urges that cause a lot of people, sadly, in our business to do things that really aren't good things, that are bad things to other people, bad things for, which they may or may not suffer consequences for, maybe unfortunately in our business. But I think there's, one of the downsides of being what I call the largest relatively unregulated asset class in the world is that you can make a lot of money. And because there isn't a ton of regulation on a lot of it, there's some bad people that get into the business because they can, right?
Mhm.
And they can get away with acting badly sometimes. And I'd like people that have known me to see that even in the midst of all that, in the face of it, I won't go there. I had a guy last year. I called him up. I said, "Can you send me an invoice for?" I think it was like $10,000. Send me an invoice. He's like, "For what?" I said, "Because 4 years ago you introduced me to a guy that we haven't talked about in the last 3 years, but I just finally did a deal with him for the first time ever, and I'm going to send you money." And I don't know any, and he was blown away. And I personally just think that that's the right thing to do. But I will admit, I don't know anybody who's paid somebody 4 years after an introduction. It is, as far as anybody's concerned, that is more than long since lapsed. But I have a very long memory that way, and I want to take care of the people I work with, and I hope that's part of a good part of a legacy.
Gabriel, it has been a pleasure talking to you today. I appreciate you being part of IMS too, and look forward to getting to know you better.
I appreciate that you're putting interviews with people far more interesting than me and creative out there that give people like me even good things to learn and ways to learn them. Thank you very much, Ricardo, and to your team.
Thanks for listening to Insight Marketing Success, where marketing knowledge meets real-world experience from vision to execution.